Good evening. My name is Chris Lee. I represent the Solano Subbasin Groundwater Sustainability Agency and also work for the Solano County Water Agency. On behalf of all the GSAs in the subbasin, we want to welcome you all and appreciate your attendance tonight. For those of you that are not familiar with the GSP and Sigma, we will cover that briefly in a few moments. We are recording the meeting and we'll dive into content in just a moment.
And I just want to say welcome. I'm facilitating tonight's meeting, and my job is to help presenters share information and also to encourage you to ask questions and share your thoughts. Community input is essential in this process, and as we'll hear tonight, this work is done by and for the community, and so we really appreciate your interest in groundwater, and we appreciate that we're here tonight. To invite everybody to please share your name in the chat, share where in the Solano Subbasin you live, work, and farm, and what you're interested to learn here tonight. Please go ahead and type that into the chat. We really want to welcome everyone into the room, and we'd love to know more about why you're here. Great, Jack, thanks, welcome. Welcome, Rich. Appreciate having a lot of farmers in the room tonight. There are 36 of you on the call right now, 36 folks, and we expect a few more to join. We really appreciate you being here. And while we invite you to keep adding to the chat and share who you are, want to ask Jesse to go to the next slide that just shares a little bit more about what we're hoping to do tonight. These are tonight's goals. And what you'll see is tonight's meeting really has a focus on sustainable groundwater management. Groundwater and surface water are linked, so we'll be touching on that too. And I really hope that we'll get a chance to talk about questions. On the next slide, you see an agenda for tonight. This is a loose agenda. We're here, and in a minute, we're going to actually even have a poll to hear more about all of you. And your interest tonight, but just to tell you what we've put together based on past feedback, we're going to have a bit of an overview from Chris Lee, and Nick Watterson is going to share more about the conditions in the subbasin. And then we have a great panel who is going to share more on efforts to recharge groundwater. But let me just take a moment to invite everybody to check out the chat. Really want to thank so many folks on here. We have representatives from Solano County Environmental Health, representatives from CAF, representatives from DWR, an administrator in North Delta GSA. A lot of folks here, and I'm not going to take time to read them all, but you can check them out, and just want to appreciate all of you. Many of you that I'm seeing in the introductions are very familiar with this topic and already doing work on sustainable groundwater management. So with that, we're going to invite a chance to go even a little deeper. As you go to the next slide, Jesse, I'm going to invite Lupe to launch question 1 in the poll. We want to make sure that we're directing the information at the right level. You'll see there's 3 options in the poll. Either it's your first town hall, you've attended maybe another one, maybe you've attended 1 or more. I think we've had 6 or 7. So please take time to fill in that poll. I'm seeing 16 answers right now. And while everybody's taking a moment to answer that, I just want to mention, for those of you who it's your first town hall, be aware that there's a lot of information here, but we do have lots of information that we'll put in the chat to share with you, so that if it's acronym soup, we are trying to avoid that, but we will have a lot of background information that we'll share via the chat. 2/3 of you have actually attended other previous town halls. So I just want to acknowledge, Lupe, if you want to share the results for everybody, you can see that many of you have attended a lot of previous town halls, and I want to let you know, starting at 6 p.m., we actually are going to go a lot deeper and actually talk about some of the work on groundwater. So please hang in there through some of the intros. All right, Chris, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jen, and good evening again to everyone. So it's good to see that a lot of you have attended some of these meetings, so I do apologize. Some of this is going to be old news, but for those of you that are attending for the first time, we did want to give you a little background on the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and the Solano Subbasin and the GSP. And as Jen was talking about earlier, it is a bit of an acronym soup tonight, but We do apologize. We'll try to spell those out as much as we can. So I'll be using SGMA or Sustainable Groundwater Management Act frequently, GSA or Groundwater Sustainability Agency, and GSP or Groundwater Sustainability Plan a few times tonight. So I do apologize for all that. Next slide, please. So up until the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, became effective on January 1st of 2015, all previous groundwater legislation was purely voluntary. What SGMA required was that a GSA, or a Groundwater Sustainability Agency, or multiple GSAs in our case, develop a GSP, or Groundwater Sustainability Plan, to manage local groundwater basins. We are required by law to do this. If we don't, the state can and will step in. And some of you may have seen some news articles of recent. There are some basins, Kauai, Kern, where the state is actually intervening and stepping in to manage things. We don't want to get there. We're doing pretty good at the local level, and you'll hear from Nick in a few moments on what the state of the subbasin is. And so that's really the reason why we're doing this tonight. As you can see here on the map, the Solano Subbasin is essentially the entire eastern half of Solano County. It also goes into Sacramento County a fair bit, and you'll be hearing from Austin Miller later from Sacramento County. It also, as you can see, those little red dots on the far right part of the map goes into Yolo County as well. And this map also shows the boundaries of the various GSAs. The Solano GSA, which I represent, is the magenta color, and it's the largest area by geography and also the largest pumper of groundwater within the subbasin. Next slide, please. So as Jen mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about timeline. This is a long-term process. We have made it through a few of the first major hurdles. As I mentioned, we have formed a number of GSAs. We did submit the Groundwater Sustainability Plan on time to DWR. And more recently, DWR actually approved our Groundwater Sustainability Plan. We are in the very last group of plans to be approved in January of this year. The good news is, again, we're headed in a good direction. The basin is in fairly decent shape, and Nick's going to be talking about that here shortly. But essentially, we have 20 years to show the state that we are managing our groundwater in a sustainable manner. And again, we're pretty much there right now, but we do have to maintain all the monitoring and reporting and making sure that if things do go a little bit sideways, that we have a plan of action to move forward, because this plan is going to be in perpetuity. We have to manage our resources on the ground just about forever. Next slide, please. So when we first started talking about SGMA 7-8 years ago, we wanted to see if we could create a single GSA for the subbasin. Didn't quite end up that way, but it all worked out as we have been working together very collaboratively, this entire time. What we ended up with were 5 separate GSAs. We have the City of Vacaville GSA, the Sacramento County GSA, the Solano Irrigation District GSA, the Northern Delta GSA, and then the Solano GSA, which I represent, which is a JPIA. It's made up of the cities of Dixon and Rio Vista, Solano County Supervisory Districts 4 and 5, the Dixon and Solano RCDs, Cal Water Dixon, Solano Farm Bureau, Main Prairie Water District, as well as Reclamation District 2068. And then as you can see at the bottom of the slide, we've also had a number of reclamation districts within the subbasin also form GSAs. They haven't really been part of the formal process, but they are recognized as GSAs as well. And I want to really give a lot of credit to some of the folks you're going to be hearing from later tonight, Nick Watterson and Vicki Kretzinger, Robert from Ludorf and Scalamini, and again, Jen, and a number of others from Ag Innovations who have put a lot of hours and time and effort into this groundwater sustainability plan to a point where we are implementing it now, and I think it's going to be quite successful as we move forward. Next slide, please. So there is quite a bit that we are required to do by the state to implement the GSP, and Nick's going to be getting into this at a much deeper level. And he'll be mentioning that we have to provide the annual reports to the state on April 1st of each year, and then do a comprehensive update every 5 years. We have to do monitoring and recording of groundwater levels, groundwater quality, look at things like subsidence, which is not really an issue here within the Solano Subbasin, but I'm sure you've heard about in other parts of the state where subsidence is a real issue. And then what we really want to make sure is that we are not hitting any of our undesirable results, which would really cause some corrective actions. And then we're also doing a lot of outreach, including events like this town hall, as Jen mentioned earlier. This is we've done more than half a dozen of these now, and they've been very well attended. So again, really appreciate your time participating tonight. And then we're also looking at various opportunities for funding to help with the implementation costs. And we're going to be potentially hearing about some pilot projects later on this evening with some willing landowners. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to hand off to Nick Watterson at Ludorf and Scalmini to discuss essentially the state of the subbasin.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chris. Well, it's great to be here. Again, as Chris mentioned, I work for Ludorf and Scalmanini. I'm a hydrogeologist, and we've been supporting the GSAs in the subbasin in development of the groundwater sustainability plan and the implementation efforts as we go forward. So, why don't we go to the next slide? I'm just going to give a brief overview of the annual report for the water year 2023. That, as Chris mentioned, it was submitted recently in April, and this is for water year 2023. So this spans the period from leading up to from October 2022 to 2023. So it is not this last winter that we experienced, but it does encompass the previous year. So kind of if you can think back to what conditions looked like then, it was a wet year in the subbasin. Depending on where you are, precipitation varies, but generally, considerably above average. And in water year 2023, we had roughly about 2/3 of the water supply, water used in the subbasin, came from surface water supplies. Those being from delta supplies that we're characterizing as delta, and those are primarily direct diversions from the delta, as well as some small amounts of state water project water going primarily for urban uses. And then also to the Solano project water in that is stored in Lake Berryessa. So roughly a little over 2/3 generally is from surface water, and that was water year 2023 was not much different from that. And then groundwater is a little less than a third of the water supply. In fact, in water year 2023, groundwater was a little closer to about a quarter of the total water supply in the subbasin. Next slide, please. And one of the things that we're tracking is not only surface water, or not only groundwater, but also surface water. Recognizing that both of these are key sources of supply for the subbasin. This graph here shows water storage conditions in Lake Berryessa with the upper line. And then the lower line showing the cumulative change in groundwater storage that we're seeing. So as you can see, Lake Berryessa has a capacity of roughly a little under 1.6 million acre feet. And as many of you may know, that was at near capacity in April of this year. Over the last several years, there's been significant increases in the water stored in Berryessa, and so it's going at this moment, and it's at pretty full capacity. In water year 2023, it increased roughly. I think it was several hundred thousand acre feet of increase in storage. In terms of groundwater changes since 1991, it's been relatively stable. The cumulative changes is very minimal. We see the groundwater levels changing and storage being increasing during wet periods and then decreasing during drier periods. But on the average, which is what really what we're most concerned with, things are very stable with very small increases, or just a slight increase in storage since 1991. Next slide, please. As far as groundwater pumping in water year 2023, we estimate groundwater pumping based on some metered data that we have for wells, and those are primarily urban wells or municipal wells. Much of the groundwater pumping is not metered, and as a result, we have methods of estimating that using a hydrologic model. But our estimates suggest that in water year 2023, there was about 150,000 acre feet of pumping. So this chart here shows annual pumping since 1991, and the dashed line there being the average. And as we can see here, 2023 values were considerably below average, you know, and quite a bit, 50,000 acre feet below what they had been the year prior. So again, a very good. This is all you know, a function of a wet year that essentially manifests as both you know, increased precipitation and then resulting with you know, decreased demand for groundwater supplies. So as part of the GSP and implementation of the GSP, there's quite a bit of monitoring of groundwater conditions throughout the subbasin. This slide here shows some of the wells that are monitored throughout the subbasin. The wells that are colored here are what we call representative monitoring site wells. These are wells that we are tracking with specific to you know, metrics that are defined in the groundwater sustainability plan. The colors that we're showing here are the change in groundwater level over the water year. So the values that are, or the dots that are shown as greens and blues, are increases in groundwater levels, ranging from smaller increases where in the green to larger increases in the darker blue. The dots that are yellow or orange and red are decreases, what we've seen during water year 2023 was all but 3 of the wells in our representative monitoring site network had increases in groundwater levels. Many of those were greater than 5 feet, and many, in fact, greater than 10 feet. The wells that we are seeing that are you know, that saw some level of decline during that period tend to be more focused in what we're calling the northwest focus area, in the northwestern part of the subbasin, where we have historically and seen some level of groundwater level declines, and as a result are paying closer attention to conditions in that area. Shown as inset charts here on this are just a select number of wells that we're tracking and showing the water levels in each of those wells. The red line is a level that we are that is called a minimum threshold, that is a basis for defining sustainability in the basin, and something that we're relating groundwater levels to, trying to stay above that to the extent possible. And you know, what we're seeing here is generally stable, you know, pretty good conditions throughout the subbasin, although there are several, you know, there are areas and wells where we have seen, especially over the last 20 years, some level of small groundwater level decline. And as a result, that's where that northwest focus area is, and where we're focusing some of the attention in the subbasin related to enhancing groundwater recharge and other activities. Next slide, please. So we're also, in addition to groundwater levels, there is a monitoring network related to groundwater quality, and this slide presents some information on nitrate concentrations. So on the left, these are nitrate concentrations in groundwater. Most of these wells are data collected from various publicly available data sets to evaluate groundwater conditions. The dots shown in red are levels that are above the maximum contaminant level for drinking water for nitrate. So there are the dots in green are lower concentrations. It is this is something that there are quite a number of wells with nitrate levels above that maximum contaminant level. And that's certainly something that is being paid attention to. I did want to note that many things related to groundwater quality are actually, even though the GSP has a monitoring network for groundwater quality, many groundwater quality programs, our other groundwater quality regulatory programs exist that are overseeing groundwater quality conditions. And it is, in addition to nitrate, there are several other constituents that the subbasin tracks to related to groundwater quality, including things like chloride and arsenic and chromium-6. On the right is, as Chris mentioned, land subsidence. While it's not a big issue in the subbasin, it is monitored and is being tracked. This map shows land subsidence during the water year period. These values shown on this map are very low. They're very small. In fact, I think the largest amount of subsidence that was measured was less than a quarter inch of negative vertical displacement during the water year. Most places, these blue dots are actually areas that have where the land surface has come up during the water year, and so things are areas where we have seen a negative a trend during this water year are generally, we believe, are unrelated to any groundwater level declines, but there's other mechanisms going on that are resulting in those changes. So as far as other efforts, so there's quite a bit of monitoring occurring and reporting that's ongoing in the subbasin. One of the there's three different key areas that I have identified here where the GSAs are focusing for implementation. Those include expanded monitoring to including in some data gap areas. There's also, with that coming additional outreach efforts. So not only things like this meeting, but I'll give you an idea of there's also other tools that the GSAs are working with and trying to disseminate information and engage with stakeholders in the basin. There are various other implementation activities that we're working on with coordination, through coordination with local landowners, resource conservation districts, and including with our neighbors and adjacent subbasins. A lot of different activities. It takes a lot of folks involved on the ground to make the GSP a success and make sure that we maintain sustainable groundwater conditions in the subbasin. And then one of the last elements that is a focus of efforts is the multi-benefit projects, looking for opportunities to enhance recharge while also improve stormwater management and increase the resiliency of the basin. So next slide, please. So I just want to bring it to folks' attention. There are, this is one of the outreach tools that, this is an interactive web map application, provides information on groundwater conditions in the subbasin. I'd encourage folks to peruse that. It's periodically updated. At the moment, we have not yet updated with conditions for spring of 2024, but this is at the link below here in this slide. You can look at some of the wells in the monitoring network and what conditions are showing there. Next slide, please. And again, just in conclusion, there's in addition to the various compliance related efforts for annual reporting and other activities, there's a strong focus on multi-benefit projects. It's of great interest. There's many different opportunities that the GSAs are exploring and engaging in related to groundwater recharge and other actions that can be taken to enhance groundwater conditions, build the resiliency that the subbasin needs to endure drier periods. Right now we're most recent years have been wetter, but we all know that there are those drier years out there, and so it's part of building that reserve and that buffer to be resilient during those times. I think that's it, Jen.
Yeah, Yeah, Nick, thank you so much. Thanks, Nick and Chris. I feel like for, the fifth of the call who was new to either the Sigma process or work in the Solano Subbasin, really appreciate the overview and the state of the subbasin. If we can go to the next slide, please. I want to invite folks to start to use, we've got an interactive panel coming up, and folks might already have questions on what Nick and Chris have shared thus far. So if you click on, you'll look at that red arrow, you'll see a QA box. Want to encourage you to type in any questions. Do you want to know what is the Northwest Focus Area? Is there an acronym that you weren't sure of? Is there something that Nick mentioned on nitrates that you're not sure of? I want to invite people to ask any questions on anything that has come up. I also want to encourage folks, we're going to continue on, I think, right now, because we promised to start a panel at 6 p.m. So what we're going to do is, in a moment, I'm going to invite Austin Miller to share his screen. I'm going to introduce a little bit about why we're doing a panel, but I want to just take a moment on this slide. If you're on Zoom, you see that QA function. If you're on via phone, you press *9 to raise your hand and ask a question. And I already see Elizabeth, thank you. There's a question in the queue. Basically, what we're going to do is we might be able to answer some of these directly if there's very specific questions, or we'll save them and answer them after the panel. So that's what's going to happen. Jesse, if you could go forward a couple slides, we're going to keep going. We're going to talk about groundwater recharge because that is the projects and management actions, and one of the potential projects and management actions that work has already begun on. So Jesse, if you go to the next slide, please. I want to just mention that if anyone, and I think a bunch of you did join our panel last year, just want to mention that in that panel, and that panel is available on the past event page if you want to hear that. You will notice that we actually had panelists including Carrie Keaton of Solano Irrigation District, who described how some things were different given the wet winter last year. Justin Cole of the city of Vacaville talked about work towards water recycling. Misty Kaltreiter talked about the Solano County-wide One Water framework. And Martha McKean talked about the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. Also on this slide, if you pull out a picture and take a picture of that code, you'll be able to get that information yourself. We'll also put it in the chat. But I wanted to let folks know that this is the work, Chris very humbly mentioned the work that Solano GSA is doing, but there's many, including GSAs on the phone, many GSAs and reclamation districts that are a part of the Solano Subbasin, and the work is a collective effort. So with that in mind, if we go to the next slide, we're going to feature three speakers tonight on the panel. I'm going to start by introducing a speaker who's Austin Miller. Austin Miller is from the Sacramento Groundwater Sustainability Agency, and he also has a really deep background, formerly at a resource conservation district. You guys, in this coming panel, you're going to hear RCD a lot. But Austin has experience working with growers, and he's going to share more about work on recharge in a place where groundwater is a primary irrigation source. He's also going to talk about work in Sacramento and the Consumnes to give us a little bit of grounding. And so Austin, I'll pass it over to you. And then we'll move on to talking with Kelly Hupp from the Dixon RCD and a grower in that area. So Austin, please go ahead. And I want to thank the two participants who have already asked questions. If you have questions as you're hearing these presentations, feel free to type them into the QA.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jen. Again, hello, everyone. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to come talk about groundwater. A lot of us do this every day as part of our day job, and when we get to share it with others who are curious, it really makes us excited. As Jen mentioned, I work with the Sacramento County Department of Water Resources, and Sac County is a groundwater sustainability agency in part of the Delta portion of the Solano Subbasin. In addition to our GSA responsibilities in Solano County or the Solano Subbasin, we also are a GSA in 2 other subbasins, and there's a 4th subbasin that covers Sacramento County. So we have quite a few different examples that we get to pull from as we try to think about advancing groundwater projects, and today's conversation specifically about recharge. If we can move to the next slide, just have some images to share. Wanted to talk about a few groundwater projects that happen in Sacramento County, just to provide some examples from outside of the subbasin. Kelly and Tommy next will talk more about some efforts happening in the Solano Subbasin, but just to share, farmers and ranchers can be a part of groundwater sustainability in a variety of different ways, whether it's big, massive projects or smaller site-specific on-farm projects. So first graphic, the big left one on the screen now, is a map of the Sac Sewers Harvest Water Project. I highlight this as an example of a kind of massive, regional project where they'll be utilizing up to 50,000 acre feet of recycled treated water that has typically just gone back into our natural water systems, but instead they are aiming to deliver that to farms in South Sacramento County, kind of south of Elk Grove, for those familiar. We have I-5 here on the left side and 99 on the right side. This water is going to be used in lieu of groundwater. So just leaving the water in the ground and in fact, maybe even recharging it with some of this recycled water that's going to be delivered. It is a way that farmers are kind of keeping their operation the same, but changing their water source to use it before it rushes out to the Delta and out to the ocean. Another way, you don't have to be a part of this massive infrastructure project, though, to do recharge. The lower right-hand picture is an image from the Omichumney-Hartnell Water District's flood MAR program. So MAR stands for Managed Aquifer Recharge. We use that term a lot. We love acronyms in this world. But through this program, the Omichumney-Hartnell Water District and their local landowners have applied for temporary winter water diversion permits, where they're able to pull water, in this case, off of the Cosumnes River and put it on to vines while they're dormant, and allow that water to sink into the ground. They've been doing some tests to make sure that there's not going to be a negative impact to crop yields, and have also been doing monitoring to see those groundwater elevations start to change. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done to really be able to scale these types of projects, but this is something that, throughout the state, people are trying to get more creative and find more sites where we can stop this or stop groundwater declines by recharging and utilizing outside water sources. These types of recharge projects, using recycled water, using winter water, again, has been a conversation statewide, and even in areas where maybe we don't have as dramatic of groundwater issues as some parts of the state, thankfully, being mindful about when we're using what water type can go a long way. The third image on the screen, this drip irrigation image, just another way that we're pursuing groundwater sustainability in Sacramento County is your kind of typical conservation programs. Jen mentioned I used to work with the Slough House Resource Conservation District, and just as Dixon RCD and Solano RCD, we aim to work with landowners to get them lined up with different funding and technical assistance that they need to make these changes. The best way to recharge our groundwater system is to leave the water there and allow natural processes to occur. So again, just wanted to kind of highlight a few projects that are happening with our neighbor subbasins, and show that whether it's a small operation or a large operation, it can go towards making our groundwater conditions more sustainable. And yeah, as Jen mentioned, our Q&A is open, but I'm going to go ahead and pass it off. We can go to the next slide as we pass it off to Kelly with Dixon RCD.
Thanks, Austin. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kelly Huff with the Dixon Resource Conservation District. Dixon RCD is one of 3 RCDs in Solano County, and our primary mission is to provide drainage services to about 33,000 acres of agricultural land in the eastern portion of the county. So you can see our boundaries within the red area, and our drainage systems are the blue lines that you're seeing in there. So the way we do this is through 70 miles of drainage ditches that are not flood control, but provide drainage. And we share our facilities and maintenance responsibilities with several other agencies, primarily ag water districts, but we also work in partnership with the city of Dixon to allow some use of our systems from the city's runoff under certain conditions under a agreement. And so we also have one of our Dixon RCD board members that sits on the Solano Subbasin Groundwater Sustainability Agency. And through those regular meetings of water agencies over these last many years, there have been some creative conversations stimulated and kind of a larger look at how we can manage our water systems more holistically and look at ways that we can deal with problems in one time of the year, like flooding, with creative ways of looking at groundwater recharge. So some of the silver linings of having drought and flood close together have been, again, talking some of these creative ideas, not just on infrastructure, but also with individual landowners and growers. And so the way our system works has sometimes been seen as a limitation because, you know, we drain relatively slowly. We're not flood control, but we're also a only earthen system. And so the way our system functions actually allows for some sinking and slowing of water. And so we've been working also on reaching out to individual growers and landowners to see what ideas they have on how we can slow, sink, and spread any of that drainage water to take some of the pressure off of our systems and also help with keeping as much of that stormwater here in our water system as possible. So next slide. Since Dixon RCD was formed in the 1950s, we have continued to work very closely with the landowners and farmers in our district. And many of them have had practices in place for years and continue to look for additional opportunities on how they can help with managing some of the stormwater and also helping with groundwater infiltration. So what I have on the slide is just a couple examples, but there's many, and they always depend on, you know, the specific situations of what type of crop it is, what type of soil it is. But a couple of interesting examples of helping infiltrate more water on farmlands is the utilization of tailwater return systems that were originally put in place as recycling for flood irrigation water, but can also be repurposed for detaining stormwater during the storm season. And then we work closely with orchard growers on having winter cover through cover crops that also increase infiltration of stormwater. So a lot of what you'll see in Solano County, because like Chris and Nick mentioned, we're largely sustainable, but we are looking for ways for people to tweak practices, not just on farmlands, but everywhere where we can just sink, slow, spread, and store that water wherever it's falling. So we have also asked a grower from our district who has been trying some innovative practices to talk a little bit more about his operation and some of the things that he's trying. So Tommy Bottoms from Tremont Farms will be joining us in just a second. And one of the other things we've been doing recently with the Groundwater Sustainability Agency is looking for ways to really measure the benefits of some of these practices. And so we're working with the farmers and Ludorf and Scalmanini and some of the agencies to really get some good numbers on how these practices benefit. Tommy?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. Thanks.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kelly. Thank you for setting that up well. I'm going to talk just a little bit, and if I go too long, Kelly, I'd say throw something at me or throw something at your computer or something and tell me when to stop. So there's when talking about keeping the water, we often talk about keeping the water on our farms as much as we can. I kind of liken it to some like a buffet. If you when I was a kid, we used to go to buffets quite a bit, and to the point where everything, when you go to a buffet, everything looks fantastic as a kid, especially, right? Because you think this is going to be great, and you are just going to choose everything from the buffet. But what you realize soon, for me at a very early age, is that we all have different appetites, and sometimes if you overeat or try too many of these practices at the same time, your appetite for buffets in general completely goes away. And so so you have to really you have to be careful at the buffet when choosing these practices, I guess. And so that's something that I'm learning, and I think a lot of growers are learning too, is that you have to be cautious, but also just ask a lot of questions and see what's best for your operation when looking at different methods to really keep the water on the farm. So that's the goal, is we're trying to recharge as much as possible while still farming. So the challenge in all of this is that we have quite demanding production schedules, right? Those are often set out by who we're selling to, whether they be the processors or just the crop itself. And so assuming that everything could dry out, I think the easiest thing for a farmer would be to just keep it all bare and to not have anything on the soil, and so that it would dry out in the spring and we would just be able to farm. But we also know that that leads to some issues that we care about a lot, the farming community, and issues that a lot of folks on this call care about, which include runoff, sediment issues, nutrient loss, and other water quality issues. Not even to mention to get into the recharge portion. So with that, we realized that sometimes the easiest path that I was saying is actually not going to work, not work really well, and doesn't accomplish all the goals that we as a grower and ag community, but also community as a whole, we need to accomplish. So as Kelly mentioned, here are a few, and these are actually pictures. I know for sure one of them, and probably maybe both of them are from our operation. So that's a retention pond there. That's stormwater that gets a lot of, because it's so flat and these soils are so heavy, water does not go down quickly. And so we need to come up with other solutions, and retention ponds like that is an option. That water is not going to go down quickly even still, because these are very deep soils, and so and heterogeneous soils, and so it's not predictable, and it doesn't go down quickly. But we can put it there instead of just running off and carrying sediment loads with those. We also cover crop on just about every acre of orchards that we have. This was we do this to accomplish a number of purposes. Originally, it was just to reduce cracking in the soil to make harvest easier. but we found that there's a lot of goals that we can accomplish by cover cropping. That includes that rainwater can, instead of running off, it can stay in place. It can also allow for that soil to stay in place. It can actually allow us to get equipment on earlier in the spring or sometimes even in the winter when needed. And we have seen an increased productivity and general health of the trees. So the practices that we went into accomplishing for completely different reasons serve many different purposes. And what those different species and what they're like in trees, we can talk about that. I will say that, again, back to that buffet, it's not always easy. There are challenges, right? And that we can ruin your appetite. I mean, in the cover crops, we still battle many vertebrate pests in terms of gophers and voles. We still have a difficult. It's not easier during harvest with the amount of residue that's sometimes from those cover crops. And so a grower or anyone has to really tailor that system to best fit what they can handle in terms of both the cultural practices and in the harvest practices. So those are just two. Why don't we look at a few others just in the row crop setting? Unless you have something you want to add, Kelly, is that okay? Okay, let's go to the next slide.
Perfect.
Okay, so so because a full cover crop would be fantastic, right? In that, and there are growers that do that full cover crop. And with a number of different species. I've got friends who use either leguminous species cover crops that can do full cover crops, turn that soil around, especially when that land is used for a later planting harvest, so they can prepare the soil in the spring still, possibly pre-irrigate if needed, and with a full cover crop. But I was interested in some of the research that was done down in Monterey that allowed for this, what we call low residue cover crops, where what if we put some type of cover crop just in the furrows to reduce the amount of water that was running off, to keep it in the field while also drying out the furrows. It accomplishes a lot of goals, both those that I stated, but also allows for some vegetative growth in the furrows, some root mass to allow reduce compaction, allow for equipment to get through the fields with a bit more ease. So what we did here is, I mean, this is a really, I mean, I'm embarrassed by how simple and how, I mean, just kind of, I mean, there's not a lot to this. So you can either drill or you can just sprinkle at this point ahead of a rain. And these are oats. I was looking for a cheaper seed, but they've used it with triticale and ryegrass and whatever fits your system. Again, put it down in the furrow, let the rain bring it up. And then at some point, usually about 50 days after sowing, you would terminate that crop, spraying it out with usually a glyphosate material. And so you can kind of see what that would look like about the stage of spraying. And it looks like, now, if I were to do it again, there's always Monday morning quarterbacking, right? I would say, hey, we could have gone one more rain. But the thing is, you don't know that, right? You don't know when you need to stop. And when we're trying different things, the last thing we want to do is we want to go one more, and everyone's looking at what you're doing and saying, "Oh, Tommy, I knew that would not work," and I don't want that for myself, and I don't want others to be really discouraged by the fact that sometimes these things are challenging, and so we wanted to make sure that it would work in this case. And it did. You would go out to this field now, which is now sunflowers, and they're about 6 inches tall, and you would have no idea that there was a cover crop there. Now, some would look at that and go, "Oh, that's too bad." And I look at that and go, it depends on what your goals are, right? If our goal was to reduce the runoff and to keep water in the field, the goal was accomplished. What they've shown down in Monterey, Richard Smith, Michael Kahn, and others have shown that there's been a reduction of 70% runoff, even after it's been sprayed, 30 days after, 30 or even longer after it's been sprayed with glyphosate. It's really that residue, whether live, obviously that's better, will reduce runoff even more, or terminated, will still reduce a significant amount of runoff. I think we can go to the next one. That's one, so that's an idea. So this is one that I have not done, but I've been in contact with the folks down in Monterey County about this. This is use of a sedan grass. And the reason why I thought this was interesting was typically we can grow sedan in this area as a cash crop. But one thing that's interesting about sedan is that in this case, it's grown in the winter, but it is not frost tolerant, right? So when a frost comes through, it will set it back, if not terminate it completely. And so what they did was they sowed sedan into fields as a full cover crop. You can see the lines where they've drilled the cover crop. And they in this particular picture, they experienced 2 days of freezing temperatures. But you can see how it dramatically reduces the longevity of that crop. Now, it didn't kill it completely, but what it does is it provides some insurance that if you cannot get in to spray when you want to because it's too wet, then it's going to stop basically growing. And so you can go in there and spray it when you do have a window to properly terminate that cover crop. There are some challenges there, and they're going to replicate it again this next year. I mean, in this case, this dry biomass was about a half a ton an acre, but it can get up to 2 tons an acre. Now, some would say I can handle that. In some operations, and folks I know very well, I would have no interest in dealing with that much dry biomass. And so we're still learning in this, because it's not as easy as, oh, we can look at that. Oh, it worked for that person. It'll work for us. A lot of times equipment's different, soil's different, and just tolerance for dealing with that residue is different. But the general direction we're heading in is, hey, this could actually work if the right species are chose or in the right context, it can certainly work. These low, I want to go back real quick on the low residue cover crops. After that amount of residue ended up being about the same amount as this, so about a half a ton an acre. And so these are 2 options. Again, a full cover crops using leguminous species, which are pretty easy to disc in and to build beds back up pretty quickly, particularly for those that are slated for a later planting where we need to harvest later, are absolutely an option that we're exploring this next year as well. But these are some of the types of scenarios or types of options that or options at the buffet table, like I mentioned, that we're kind of looking at and saying, okay, these are stuff that fit our appetite pretty well, and maybe they don't, but we want to go in a pace that doesn't ruin our appetite, right? And a pace, and also with different options that say, hey, we're actually going to go back to that restaurant of these cover crops or whatever, or retention ponds or whatever it might be, and so that we can continue. So that's all I've got, Kelly, if that's okay.
That's great, Tommy. Thank you. Yeah, just to add to what Tommy's saying, I think that's the biggest thing that I see kind of on the sidelines, is that when we allow growers and others to just use their creativity and to make mistakes or to try things out, but don't give a prescription, we get such great results. And also we're pulling from folks who have, in a lot of cases, a really long history on these lands and know kind of what different fields are capable of doing and where the areas are that are good for recharge and those kind of things. So we're lucky to have the farmers working on our behalf on this. So
thank you. And we're really lucky to have both of you sharing this experience. And I just want to share, Tommy, Carolyn wrote, I'm so excited to see that info on low residue cover cropping. So that is one of the things that has come in, and I think people may want to ask more about that. A couple of folks have just joined on the call, and I want to encourage you to use the question answer function. Kelly, Tommy, Austin, we might come back to you in a moment, but why don't If we can go to the next slide, one of the questioners actually queued up a question that I think, Chris, I'm going to turn to you to answer. And Herb asks, is there already locally controlled funding for groundwater recharge demonstration projects? So maybe you could spend a minute answering that, and then we'll invite everybody back. And while you're answering that, Chris, I want to encourage folks, if you have questions on anything you just heard or other work on groundwater in the subbasin, feel free to type them in, and we'll have everybody back on screen in a moment to answer your questions.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Yeah, that was a great question from Herb, and that's something that we've been looking at for years now to try to find additional funding to help implement the groundwater sustainability plan. And we were very fortunate to recently get a Prop 68 grant of a little bit more than $4 million that will help us do a number of things, including additional monitoring, help with the reporting, help us better understand our interconnected surface waters. And as you just mentioned, and as Mr. Bottoms mentioned, some pilot projects, working with willing landowners for, as we just heard, different agricultural practices to capture rain or maybe flood waters. Mr. Wimmer actually is one of the interested landowners that is looking to potentially do some things on his property. As I see Mr. Collins is also on the call tonight, who's also an interested landowner and has some very interesting ideas on what we just heard about cover crops and things in furrows and just measuring how much water is being lost on these fields. And as we just heard from Mr. Bottoms, how much can we actually retain? But it really does go down to what Tommy was talking about and what Kelly was talking about. It is going to be different for each individual grower and dependent on the soil, what their crops going to be. And so I like the buffet description. It's not going to work for everyone. Some people like a salad, others are just meat and potatoes. So you really got to figure out what is going to work best for you. But really it does come down to, we do have some funding this year, and we are going to be reaching out. And again, as I just mentioned, there's a few interested landowners on this call, and we know there's a few others that would like to start looking at things to help with their agriculture productions that will also help put some additional water back into the subbasin, which is what we're trying to do. Yeah, I hope that helped, Jen.
Great. Yeah, thanks. And if that didn't help, or folks have other questions beyond that, go ahead and type them into the Q&A. And I'm gonna we're gonna stop sharing the screen, and I want to just invite all the panelists, cameras on, everybody you've heard from so far. Want to just invite you to share your screen, and let's go to a few of the other questions. And I'm going to start. I was just really interested to understand, Tommy, what do you think? There's a lot of folks on the call who are growers, but also a lot of folks who aren't. What do you think might most surprise folks? You talked about a few success stories, but can you tell us about a time you were at the buffet and you did too much at once, and what happened? Or
Yeah, I mean, I want to be careful in not making it sound easier than it is. It is not. And so I think that one thing I guess you have to realize is that how difficult the ag industry is, especially right now. I mean, we're talking about very slim margins in a lot of these crops, and the windows are very tight. And so I think that when they say, oh, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this, I've fallen flat on my face a number of times, where you either have to change crops, or you have to change the planting orders, or you frustrate the people in your operation because you have to send so many other pieces of equipment through a field or whatever that might be. And so I think that when talking with growers, I think that having an extreme amount of patience and trying to understand their perspective is critical, because pushing it on them is that's their livelihood, and it's really a tight time. I mean, if everybody was flush with money and they could fail and not worry about it, then it's no problem. Everyone would try it, but that's not the case at all. And so I will say we've done a lot of 15-acre, 10-acre, 5-acre just trials, because scaling that up means could potentially be really challenging. And so once we know it works and we've seen it work over many years, then I think there's better potential. That doesn't answer your question directly, Jen. So,
Yeah.
but I think that yeah, I could talk either problems that I've had or others have had all day long because it's those are easy to find.
Yeah. And I want to open it up to the entire panel because I know Nick has also been involved in pilot projects. Austin, you too. Anything that has surprised you, good, positive, negative, just sharing some of the lessons. Yeah.
I'll just add that water rights in California are a challenging topic, to say the least, and designed before recharge was really a concept that in the ways that it is now. So we've had some in like the Kasuna Subbasin as we've tried to explore more recharge projects, trying to figure out how to approach these things and how you're accounting for that groundwater once it goes into the ground. I think there's kind of a changing tide of more, as this concept becomes more widely adopted and as the state kind of catches up to Sigma and what Sigma requires, hopefully these things will start to get easier and easier, but it is still a lot to try to figure out. And I think that's why GSAs are trying to do outreach activities like this, is to show folks that there's some contacts in your local area who are also trying to work on this, and we'll be stronger together.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And while we are here, we've got the panel, obviously, but there's 33 attendees on this call. And so, Lupe, in a moment, I want to ask you, or if you're ready now, if you might bring up the last poll question, because it would be great to take the benefit of the folks in the room. And so this question is, if you're a landowner in the Solano Subbasin, a grower or somebody working in other ways, anything that you can share about groundwater recharge practices that you're interested in and or practicing. There's space for you to add in on this poll question, and we'll share some results. We'll leave this up for a bit, and really want to invite, Tommy and others on the panel share their experience, but want to hear any thoughts you have. While we're inviting folks to share more about groundwater recharge practices they're interested in or practices they're looking at, Nick, do you want to say any more? I just want to make sure we got the question in the room. Elizabeth asked, what are the public health issues with the noted pollutants, and if there's a risk standard? And Nick, you shared a little bit about MCL's maximum contaminant levels, but if you might, anything else you want to just share with the group on that question?
Well, yeah, I guess I'll just, I mean, I did want to say, yeah, I'm not the public health expert. I'm a hydrogeologist, so I won't play that. But we, generally what we do follow the MCLs as a standard that when we're looking at trying to avoid any impacts to drinking water users, that's a, that's something that's considered. There, for every constituent, there's a different maximum contaminant level that's been that or for those that have a potential to have a health effect that are established by these regulatory entities. And so I think, yeah, you'd really want to really understand what those are for a given chemical or constituent. You'd want to consult some other resources, but it is notable that public water systems are required to comply with those standards. Private domestic wells are not necessarily. That's not a requirement. There's no regulatory agency overseeing those private domestic wells. So but yeah, again, it's just we use those MCLs as a guide, but I wouldn't want to weigh in on the actual health effects of a given chemical.
Great, yeah, thanks, Nick. And want to maybe do a couple more questions. Herb Wimmer asked, are there any GSAs like ours that have already built demonstration projects? And just want to note, Austin shared more about a water district in Sac County. I want to invite others to answer that, and then I'm going to invite panelists to ask questions of each other. So yeah, first, Austin, do you want to share that? And anyone else want to talk about other things you're seeing in other groundwater sustainability agencies?
Thinking about I'll just add that, yeah, the Omichumni Hartnell Water District, they have had a lot of great momentum around their recharge projects. I'm also going to drop a short YouTube video link onto that question that the California Department of Water Resources put together in partnership with OH that has some great flyover imagery from and some more from their staff.
Great, yeah.
Yeah, and
Go ahead, Nick.
yeah, and I would just add that there are various entities doing these kinds of things throughout the state. I think it's important to recognize that, but at the same time, every subbase is unique. The conditions in every and as Tommy talked about, I mean, every field is a little bit unique potentially, and so there's we can look, and we are looking to other areas to for lessons learned, including Salinas, and but of course conditions are different in Salinas than they are in the Solano Subbasin, so there's also considerations on those sorts of things. So even though we're looking to these other areas for lessons to bring to the conversation, you're also looking to do that local ground truthing and verification that that practice or project will have a similar response or success here.
Yeah, thanks. Great. And there are a couple things in the chat for folks to look at related to that. Want to invite question, Chris, maybe you had a question for one of the panelists.
Yeah, not to put Tommy on the spot, but he had some great things that he was talking about, and really interested. And again, as you've talked about, and we've all talked about, every field is different, every production thing is different. But you talked about some winter cash crops like Sudan grass. Have you had any other successful buffet trips that you can maybe share with the group where there's an incentive there for other landowners, other growers to potentially think about this and maybe talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I want to clarify real quick on that Sudan. So the Sudan in our area is grown as a summer cash crop.
Okay.
And then as a in the winter, this idea in the winter would be that with the intention of we're going to plant it, let it grow a little while it's still warm, and that it would the freeze would kill it. The idea, or at least set it back, because the idea is that I think a lot of growers, conventional growers, nightmare is that you have this cover crop growing and you can't terminate it because the field is wet or something, and so you're watching it grow, which is beautiful, and the public is just enthralled by it, and you're seeing like, oh man, I've got to get there and I can't. And so the idea was having this freeze come and kind of set that back and keep that cover crop in check per se, was attractive. I think one of the things that we've done, and I'm not alone in this, there's a lot of growers that is really, the state has really promoted a lot of state and processors. So there's a lot of incentive for growers right now to try different practices. So I'm going to give you some examples of what that looks like. So on the state side, the Healthy Soils Program is something that we've really dove into, and especially in the orchard side, and so that's a 3-year program. That, I mean, there's a lot of different practices, whether that be compost or cover crops, or I mean, you name it, any practice that would promote soil health that's something that they're interested in, whether a demonstration, which we haven't done, but just in terms of practices. We also have some trials from folks at UC Davis on our farm trying different things as well that have been incentivized from the Healthy Soils program. There's also on the private side, on the industry side, there are companies like Campbell Soups that look at it and say, hey, we want to incentivize growers because they care about the sustainability of their product. And so they will partner. A grower can take some funding from Campbell Soup. They can also take it from other places. And they say, we'd like you to try a practice that you have not done before, whether that be covered. And they are carte blanche, and they'll let you try anything as long as you can justify how it promotes sustainability. So they've been fantastic. And I know there's a number of companies that are similar to that. Blue Diamond's done a lot. I mean, the Almond Board in general has done a lot for cover cropping. But so those are some different options, and really they allow you to kind of cook up how you they allow you to look at your farm, like we talked about, and really say, okay, what works in our operation, what works field by field, and they'll support you primarily financially. They're not providing a lot of technical support per se, but in both cases. But that's okay sometimes because the farmer is really the one who has to make it work. And to have somebody come in on the technical side and say, hey, here's how to make it work, that's not probably going to go over really well all the time. So or any of the time. So it allows them to support you, but also allow you to do what you think is best. Hope that answers your question a little bit, Chris.
Oh, that was fantastic. Thank you, Tom.
Great. And Kelly, did you have something you wanted to add?
I think Elizabeth Patterson has been referencing some of this too, but I think just in general in the Southern Central Valley, there's been, a lot of innovation with irrigation districts and them giving some direct incentives to farmers to take water, extra water during different times of year, and letting them either change the prices of their water, reduce their price of water during the growing season, or just lots of innovative ideas. And then on the regulatory side, especially in the state, there's been a recognition of trying to get out of the way and kind of reduce some of the roadblocks that there are to people being creative. So I think over the last couple of years, there's been some exciting things, especially down south.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. Anything panelists want to add? I also folks, if they want to check the chat, Elizabeth, thanks for some additions. Kate, as well, put in some additions. Vicki added. I will add a link from Vicki, but want to just invite another moment or two for folks to share or ask other questions.
I want to add one thing, and I think Nick had talked about it, and I thought it was really good, is that sometimes when we look at different GSAs, we can look at the practices that they're doing and say, man, we should be doing that. And I often, I've read a lot about them, and I think the younger me would look at it and say, man, we're going to do groundwater recharge in Solano County, or we're going to do these different practices that have just had immense success in the Southern San Joaquin Valley. The reality is, a lot of times, especially where we're farming, doesn't work. The way the soils are, the way the aquifers are set up, we're just not very good candidates for that. And I've spent a lot of time looking at maps and looking at fields and thinking, man, maybe we could do this here, or especially if we could do it in a they often have basins out on the edges of fields or something, and you think that could really work, or another is a vegetated drainage ditch. Well, there's challenges with that. If you vegetate your drainage ditches, water doesn't move, and it can back up into neighbors' fields. And so, as landowners, it's really challenging to run out to growers, or especially if you have a grower on your field, and say we should be doing this. The reality is, it has to really fit And even though it's worked in other parts of the state is huge. It's large, and it's so diverse in the different practices. And we've got to find in Solano County and in this GSA what works best, and each grower what works best for them on their properties.
Yeah.
Nick, oh, sorry, Jen. Nick, I was going to, maybe you could expand a little bit. So Tommy had a really good point. We have a figure or two in the GSP that talks about recharge potential in the basin based on soil types and whatnot. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I can say that, I mean, and I think this, kind of feeds into exactly what Tommy was saying, is that, we can do, we can do some desktop analyses and say, based on the best available, information we have on these conditions, it would suggest that these soil characteristics and these groundwater levels and all these things are, all line up as great candidates. And then, we go out and we talk to the farmer and well, that part of, that piece of property doesn't drain at all, right? And so even though all the other data are suggesting that that it does, and so I think it, it really does lend to, I mean, we want to do these first level of analyses, and we have done those to identify, what appears, at first blush to have good potential for exploring further, but then ultimately, we do need to look at those areas, and use the understanding of those folks that are familiar with how does that field behave, right? Is there, because even though we've got amazing resources out there on soil conditions and other conditions, this is the natural, and some of these fields have been altered over time, as well as the mapping isn't perfect. It just doesn't capture everything, and so. And then there's those considerations. There's also things like, depending on the mechanism or the approach that you're going to take. So if if your approach is to build a recharge pond, as an example, and excavate some, to some depth, maybe you don't really care so much about the soil profile. You're really talking about the deeper subsurface. And so, yeah, we definitely have tools, and we've taken, gone through these efforts to identify areas that are, that appear to have potential. And then that's sort of where we're at now, is trying to, move that forward, and trying to work with a handful of landowners that are, just to kind of to pilot some things and start exploring that, but ultimately really look to the folks most familiar with conditions, and whether it seems like it's going to work out, before pursuing those sorts of things.
Well, thanks. I want to take a moment just to bring in some of the ideas that came in from the poll. And I also want to just mention that for those of you still on, we also have a way that we'd like to get information from you. So want to just mention, so Carolyn says, I only have a 1/4 acre in suburban Dixon, but have installed small cisterns to capture roof runoff and spread it. I'd be interested in lawns that are deeper rooted perennial. Super excited to learn about low residue cover crops. So just really want to thank folks for putting it in the room. Herb mentions, I want to hear more about data-driven project results based on scientific methods. Rich, you mentioned, might we as a GSA collectively think about a goal of recharging through basin-wide reduced runoff from ag lands, 10, 20, or even 30,000 acre feet of water each year. So yeah, a lot of great ideas in addition to the ones that the panelists mentioned, and really want to thank folks for this discussion. I want to make sure I honor people's time. And so I'm going to ask Jesse if you wouldn't mind just putting back on the slide with the timeline. We want to make sure and mention, just come back to this. As Chris mentioned, the Solano Subbasin is in great shape, but we want to continue to do good work. This is a state mandated program, and we are working towards long-term sustainability. So just wanted to share that timeline again. If we go to the next slide, I want to just take a moment to remind folks ways that you can stay involved. As I mentioned, if you know folks who would be interested in this conversation, it is going to be put on the solanogsp.com website. There's also the groundwaterguide.com. Really want to take a moment to thank the Spanish translators. The Groundwater Guide is also a site available in Spanish, we really want to thank the translators on this call. This Spanish translation will also be available, so want to encourage you to reach out to your community. There are lots of events in partnership with the RCDs. Thank you, Kelly, and also Chris Rose was on this call. The RCDs are doing some great work. You see other examples here. Want to take a moment to highlight, and we'll share in the chat a link to One Water, which is an ongoing effort in Solano County. And then Lupe has added in the chat 2 forms. There's a Spanish form and an English form. There were a number of things that came up, and I could even tell from your poll comments that people are thinking about this in a lot of different ways. So take a moment right now while it's fresh. Please click on those 2 links. They invite you to join our newsletter. They invite you to give us feedback on this meeting. They invite you to tell us how you would like to stay in touch. And they're a really great way. If we just go to the next slide, go ahead and go to the last slide. I think what's most important is I want to thank the panelists, Tommy, Kelly, Austin, Chris, Nick, Vicky. Want to thank you all for your time. And want to thank everybody who took time this evening. As Austin said, this is really a joint effort, and our work is really a part of the work that all of you are doing out there. So ranging from DAWR to environmental health to growers, so many of you on this call, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us, taking the time to give us feedback. And we wish you a great evening and look forward to keeping in touch.